Minute, we're waiting on Admiral COMAN, who will be here shortly. Good afternoon. Just to make sure that you're on the right airplane, this is a symposium to discuss maritime security in the Balkans and the Black Sea. My name is John SANDOZ. I'll be your moderator today. On my left is Admiral JAWORSKI of the Polish Navy, and then on his left is Admiral PEDRE, UK Strike Force Commander, and Admiral COMAN, Romanian Navy. So I'm looking forward to your remarks. I'm going to lead off with a couple of introductory remarks, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions and discussion. So a number of questions frame this session today. The first is, what should the future naval balance of forces in the Black Sea look like after the war in Ukraine? It's not too early to be thinking about this. Secondly, how are current international legal instruments, including the Montreux Convention, relevant to national maritime security and sovereignty, freedom of navigation, and the rights for commercial exploitation of exclusive economic zones in the Black Sea? Thirdly, in view of the current restrictions on naval forces operating in the Black Sea, what are the prospects for NATO presence in the Black Sea after the Ukraine war ends? And finally, based on the Ukraine-Russia naval confrontations that have already occurred during the war, what would be the optimal structure for NATO presence in the Black Sea after the war in Ukraine ends? Based on the Ukraine-Russia naval confrontations during the war, what would be the optimal structure of those forces and coastal defenses for the NATO littoral member states? So as we consider these and other questions, we should first acknowledge how Russia's war against Ukraine has underscored the strategic value of the Black Sea as a maritime commons essential to littoral states' economies, security, and prosperity. Nowhere was this more evident than in Ukraine's consequential battle for Snake Island, which controls Black Sea access to the Danube trade. Beyond numerous East European trade and security issues, the Black Sea has also grown in global significance for addressing African food crises and ensuring Europe's linkage to critical supply chains. As a result of this reality, many have called for a Black Sea strategy. Given the growing challenge of addressing emerging maritime threats within the existing legal and security framework, developing a Black Sea strategy might begin with a shared political commitment and national level cooperation to improve maritime governance within the sea. While authorities and capabilities exist today to govern each nation's ports and territorial waters in peacetime, some countries lack the maritime capacity to defend their EEZs against emerging threats. This capacity shortfall could be addressed by co-developing security initiatives that expand ISR collection, improved information sharing, advanced planning, and exercise responses of forces to ensure the safety and security of maritime commerce and to protect national EEZs. Perhaps NATO naval forces could advise and assist Black Sea member states in strengthening their maritime governance. Improving maritime governance will require all partners to mutually commit to preserving the Black Sea's important role as a maritime commons that serves shared European economic and security interests. So I'm going to ask first Admiral Jaworski to lead off with some comments from a Polish Navy perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here and have this opportunity to cover the subject. And let me present a point of view on this subject from the Baltic Sea region perspective. And I would cover the most important naval domain factors of the war in Ukraine in three aspects. First, military. Second, global economy and naval domain. And third, risk and opportunities for post-war time. One of the most important questions connected with Ukraine is how these relatively small Ukrainian forces could effectively engage overwhelming enemy forces. The answer is not so simple. but it's very important for other navies, which operate in the vicinity of the Russian Navy. To those navies belong both Romanian and Polish Navy, but also others. They have to operate in the similar operational conditions, relatively confined area in the vicinity of Russian Navy fleets consisted not only with ship forces, but also with extensive air defense and anti-ship coastal forces. Ukrainian war in the naval domain can be described as the clash of two kinds of naval combat warfare, sea control versus sea denial. The Russian forces probably had the intention to take the control over the whole naval area in the northern part of the Black Sea. The mission of the Ukrainian forces was not to allow them to do that. And probably the most important factor which decided about failure of the Russian plan was lack of the proper planning of use the naval forces within the joint or multi-domain operation. The second factor may be that the Russian Black Sea Fleet was trained to other missions that blockade to other country. To sum up, the war in Ukraine shows how important is cooperation and comprehension not only between the forces but also among commands of every level, including political authorities. Furthermore, this war shows that two old military truths are still alive. Like Sun Tzu said, to win you have to know your opponent and you cannot disregard him. During the war in Ukraine, we have witnessed strengthening the role of unmanned systems in the military operations. The coordinated Ukrainian attack on Sevastopol with use of the air and naval unmanned assets could be a milestone in the development of the new level of combat activities, where the manned and unmanned means both are equally important. Both sides of the conflict are still developing its abilities in the era of unmanned assets. Not only for intelligence and surveillance purposes, but also for strikes against sea and coastal infrastructure. There is information about Ukrainian activities and use of unmanned assets, but it is worth to underline that Russians use such assets too. They have also lessons learned from previous action and Ukraine activities monitoring. So it is worth saying that unmanned systems are a great tool for waging war at sea. But to fully achieve complete success and control of the sea, manned systems are needed as well. The war in Ukraine reminded again how strong the mine warfare might be. Use of mines affects military activity as well as civilian shipping. Even relatively old, not sophisticated mines can create a serious threat, which affects not only fighting parties, but the whole region, hampering usage of ports that belongs to other countries. In the time of globalization, disruption of the sea lines of communications caused by mines influence even the entire global community. And one of the most important problems for all navies is to find proper measures which allow either prevent or quickly neutralize a threat caused by naval mines. Reaction to this requires strong surveillance capabilities and involvement not only mine countermeasure forces to patrol vital routes and areas, but also other military vessels and air assets. The new era connected with mine warfare seems to be seabed warfare. Nord Stream sabotage on Baltic Sea shows how vulnerable is the undersea infrastructure. Future challenge will be how to effectively protect that critical infrastructure. The environment for both seabed and mine warfare is quite similar, but not the same. Hence, the assets of the mine warfare may be used in seabed warfare in general. Last month, we can observe intensification of Russian activities which are conducted potentially against European and Atlantic underwater infrastructure, which covers not only communication cables, but also energy cables. Without a doubt, the war in Ukraine changed the world of global maritime industry and shipping. Sanctions imposed on Russian Federation by European Union, United States, and other countries caused changes in the global trade of crude oil and gas, but not only. These changes, quite radical, are strictly connected with naval domain and shipping lines. First of all, we can see significant changes in crude oil flows. European markets were closed for Russian oil and finally replaced by buyers in India and China. The oil for Europe is now transported mainly from Americas, Africa, and Middle East. The changes in trade patterns concern not only oil and its products, but also are connected with LNG, coal, chemicals, grains, and so on. Many years ago, there was a public discussion in Poland whether the Navy is really needed in our stable state of security. Nowadays, nobody asks if the Navy is needed. The question is, what can the Navy do more for our safety of the country? Paradoxally, in Russia too, from the beginning of the war, there were many voices that Russia needs its own merchant fleet, not only owned by Russia, but also under Russian flag. Nowadays, Russia is trying to avoid sanctions against its trade in energy resources, building unofficially so-called ghost fleet, consisting of quite old tankers, which can be very dangerous for shipping and environmental safety. Fortunately, the ships all around the world continue to deliver their cargoes. During the COVID pandemic, shipping had learned to be more flexible and collaborative. The war in Ukraine forced ship owners to use the experience from that time. However, longer routes, pushing up rates, and ship insurance have indirect impact on the prices of many goods. So nowadays, the shipbuilding is more expensive. So the overall conclusion may be that every country should have its own flagged merchant fleet of critical vessels. To sum up, war in Ukraine has had a major impact, not only for tactics in operation in maritime domain, but also on the global economy. Moreover, it shows how important it is to have well-balanced naval fleet, able to deal with every potential threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. I just want to suggest that your mention of unmanned systems is got to receive a lot of attention, since the limitations of manned systems are becoming more and more apparent, particularly in small seas. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Next, we'd like to hear your thoughts, Admiral PEDRE, about the Black Sea and NATO maritime operations. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Distinguished guests, it's a great privilege to be invited to speak at this auspicious Black Sea and Balkan Security Forum, and my thanks to the New Strategy Centre for the opportunity. Tragically, now in its second year, and in fact 9 years since the illegal annexation of Crimea, the war in Ukraine has returned conventional conflict to Europe at a scale not seen since World War II, and thus I think it's timely to consider the naval implications. And what happens in the Black Sea, of course, has global ramifications. Given the limited time allocated, following a fleeting examination of the naval character of the war, it's my intent to focus on three principal naval elements that have predominated in the campaign, including sea control, developments in uncrewed systems, and the use of blockade by the Russian Navy, themes which, of course, my august colleague to my right has touched upon already. My first observation concerns the notable naval aspects of the war, despite the maritime campaign receiving scant coverage in the media, which has been transfixed by the land-centric war of attrition in the East. I would argue that an instrumental factor in Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 was the imperative to regain a commanding position in the Black Sea. Crimea serves as the backstop for Russian power projection against NATO's southern flank and affords vital access to the Mediterranean and beyond, as evidenced by the central role played by Sevastopol in Russia's campaign in Syria. Loss of a sustainable position in Crimea would greatly complicate Russian power projection in the Mediterranean, Middle East and Levantine basin. Since 2014, Russia has struggled to resupply Crimea. Whilst the completion of the Kerch Bridge in 2018 helped mitigate this problem, the establishment of a land bridge was a key consideration in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year, with Ukraine's southern coast a strategic objective for Moscow. Consequently, Mariupol was a key maritime target to enable a land bridge between Russian territory and the island, if you like, of Crimea, thereby reducing the vulnerability of Sevastopol. Russian attempts to capture Odessa in the early stages of the war signalled Moscow's strategic intent to deny Ukraine Black Sea access and ensure Russian regional dominance. In the opening stages of the war, the Russian Navy acted swiftly to achieve sea control along the Ukrainian littoral and exploited the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea to project power ashore. This, as we've heard, included the seizure of Snake Island, which might have enabled the Russian Navy to establish an A2AD bubble in the northwest Black Sea. However, as Ukraine has ably demonstrated, a coastal nation fighting an expeditionary navy on its own littoral does not need to establish command of the sea for itself. It only needs to deny it to the adversary. The sinking of the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, in April last year by a Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missile strike, and the later abandonment of Snake Island by Russian forces following substantial Ukrainian bombardment exemplify the challenges in maintaining sea control. The subsequent imposition of a Ukrainian multi-layered A2AD bubble in the northwest Black Sea has severely constrained Russian naval freedom of manoeuvre on the surface and the air. Of note, however, the Ukrainians have thus far been unable to constrain Russian subsurface freedom of action, allowing Russian Kilo-class SSKs to patrol with relative impunity. In August last year, Ukraine implemented a bold and more assertive strategy harassing the Black Sea Fleet. Despite lacking an operational navy, Ukraine has been able to undermine Russian naval dominance through innovation and initiative. This exploitation of sea denial is, of course, by no means new. Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Southern Europe in the mid-1970s, commented, "The denying naval commander strikes at a time and place of his choosing to achieve maximum surprise. In this way, a markedly inferior force can successfully thwart a superior force." This has impacted Russian plans for an amphibious assault on Odessa and constrained Moscow's original geostrategic intent to control the Ukrainian southern coast. The implications for the naval domain are significant, and given the inexorable proliferation of increasingly potent anti-ship capabilities globally, this aspect of the war will widely resonate. The second prominent area, which we briefly touched on already in this session, concerns the increasing exploitation of uncrewed systems. Whilst, of course, the use of uncrewed surface vessels, or USVs, is not new, the audacious combination of uncrewed air and surface assets attacking Sevastopol on the 29th of October last year, I would argue, heralded a new chapter in uncrewed naval warfare. Whilst precise details of the attack remain unclear, some 7 small USVs and a similar number of uncrewed air vehicles mounted the largest attack on Sevastopol since the start of the war. Damage assessment remains contested, but it's widely understood that the Russian minesweeper Ivan Gulabets sustained minor damage. Whilst the damage inflicted may not have been extensive, the impact of the attack on Russian Black Sea operations has been significant and highlights the growing capabilities of uncrewed systems. Developments in AI, robotics, nanotechnology, and also edge processing and technology will accelerate the decision speed and lethality of uncrewed systems, whose ubiquity in naval warfare will only grow. The scale and pace of Ukrainian innovation in this asymmetric capability underlines the substantial potential. The potential threat posed by uncrewed systems to naval vessels operating in ports, choke points, and the littoral is clear, and will demand greater focus on the development of effective countermeasures. This threat is even more challenging when coordinated with other attack vectors. In blue water scenarios, warning times likely to be greater with reduced background traffic, but the future challenge is inherent in defeating fast-moving, stealthy, coordinated swarms of AI-enabled air, surface, and subsurface uncrewed systems are self-evident. The final aspect I will briefly highlight concerns Russia's swift imposition of a commercial blockade on Ukraine, isolating Kyiv from the vital economic lifelines underpinning its war effort. Before the invasion, over 70% of Ukraine's trade was conducted via Black Sea shipping through key ports including Odessa and Mariupol. Since the war began, Ukraine's exports have collapsed by about 50%, depressing revenues and forcing reliance on less efficient overland routes. By controlling the south, Russia has been able to apply pressure to Ukraine and the west, waging a global commodity war, anticipating that food disruption coupled with energy supply coercion would undermine Western public resolve. At the start of the war, these actions manifested in substantial global contagion, catalysing rampant food inflation prices and impacting on some of the most vulnerable nations. Last year's UN-brokered Black Sea Grain Initiative has been central to mitigating the blockade's impact, albeit Ukraine's agricultural exports have still declined by about 30%. Food prices, as we all know, remain high when compared to pre-war. Meanwhile, the impact on Ukraine's metallurgical and mineral sectors has been far more severe, with sales falling by over 60% last year. The difficulties in renegotiating Black Sea Grain Initiative highlight its fragility and the enduring importance of maintaining strategic sea lines of communication. Blockade tactics have a long history in naval strategy, and many of the fundamental tenets developed in the 19th century have been applied with brutal effect in this war, a timely reminder for us all. In conclusion, the war in Ukraine has impacted very substantially on the naval domain, and its implications will undoubtedly shape naval thinking and capability development for many years to come. Whilst the naval aspects of the war have not received significant consideration by the media, I hope that I have demonstrated the centrality of the Black Sea to strategy in the war. Ukraine's southern littoral undoubtedly constitutes a vital strategic prize for Moscow, and consequently our ability to support Ukraine's naval campaign will have strategic ramifications for the outcome of this tragic war. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. I'm glad that you emphasize the role of uncrewed systems. I think that the Ukraine war has been a demonstration of the pathway for innovation of unmanned systems. They've been used effectively by both sides, and I think in the maritime environment, this is where the real prize is in terms of sea control, in terms of blockading, and I think that this is an obvious area for NATO maritime forces to focus, because it's a laboratory for our future naval capabilities. Next, I'd like to ask Admiral COMAN to offer some remarks on the Black Sea and the maritime role. And I'm going to come back to the question of what is the NATO maritime contribution post-Ukraine. And that may be a difficult question to answer, but I'd like to at least tee that up for discussion. So, Admiral, if you would, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Admirals, distinguished guests, good afternoon. I'm Rear Admiral Liviu COMAN, the CNO deputy. And I would like to say that as a former ship driver and from my position, deputy of the chief of the Naval Forces Staff, once the horizon of the maritime domain and the sea revealed to you, you are left to see how the beauty of the relationships between its component elements are revealed, and the fascination of the rediscovering the world around you makes you uncover new truths. The synonymy of maritime domain and the sea both attract and fascinate you. Both are intense, with unimaginable depths, with sharp reverberations and unexpected reflections. Since last year, Russians were actively enforcing their naval blockade in the northwest Black Sea and decided to attack a few commercial vessels that were trying to depart Ukrainian ports or were stationed in their close vicinity. Due to the mentioned vessels' inability to enter Ukrainian ports, a large portion of the naval traffic was rerouted to the Danube River, and the Ukrainian ships started exporting grain and other products through their ports on the Danube. This cargo was then picked up by smaller vessels and transported to the other ports, including to the port of Constanța, and subsequently transferred on a larger ship to be shipped to their final destination. This created a safety of navigation issue due to the large number of vessels gathered in a square by 10 nautical miles in front of Sulina, and sometimes the numbers of these vessels were around 150 or maybe with a peak of 200 ships. In so close vicinities, these 150 ships could have a very strong impact on freedom of navigation, because having this agglomeration of the ships could appear some accidental due to the bad weather or due to the bad condition of the sea or windy times, or could appear some illegally traffic of different kind of armament or person or drugs. These agglomerations in the Sulina Channel also prove that the transfer of ships during the Sulina Channel is very much slowed and took a lot of time to transport such a lot of material. Since today we are talking about more than 30 million tons of grains carried through the Sulina Channel or through Constanța port. And of course, this unexpected situation put the Romanian Navy in the situation to have a very strong recognized maritime picture and to act in a situation of search and rescue or in a situation or a situation of environmental accidents. Another issue regarding this aspect is that a lot of insurance companies increased their prices for the ships are passing through the Black Sea from Istanbul to Port Constanța or Sulina, and that was one of the reasons that the prices of the final products increased as well. Another issue I would like to highlight is the fact during the war were several instances when Russian ships operating close to Romanian gas and oil rigs. Although there are no instances of harassment or unprofessional behavior reported by offshore operators, the presence of Russian ships close to our rigs has the potential to deter or even disrupt their activity. Ports and oil and gas extraction platforms have become an ever-present target and concern from the constant flow of drifting mines, and possibly may open the way of terrorist and sabotage attacks, taking into consideration the developing of the crisis situation in the Black Sea. The repercussions of the slowdowns and stoppages in this context justify the development of the wide-reaching preventive measures. Faced with these challenges, port authorities and private operators must ensure security 24 hours a day, every day. These tasks include continuous inspections of critical infrastructure assets, threat detection and security response, as well as on-demand inspection after storm, ongoing surveys to ensure navigable waterways, hull pipelines, inspections, and a wide range of other missions. The new spectrum of technology can fill this gap better than legacy approaches. Thus, the ever-growing need and use of drones, the technology reaching a level of development sufficient enough to allow them to perform almost every task needed to guarantee the immediate protection and crisis response for critical infrastructure elements. The tasks range from regular inspections and survey of underwater structure and pipelines to air and surface patrols and surveillance for hostile forces or objects, and even perform emergency response tasks such as search and rescue or fire interventions. Adding to all this, some extra jamming capability for hostile drones and static sonars for underwater threats will transform any oil or gas rig in a regular fortress or water. Moreover, we see reports that the sea, the estuaries and the wetland close to the coast are likely to have been polluted by the toxic chemicals released from the ammunition used during the war. In addition, the commercial vessel that Russia hit in 2022 in the northwest Black Sea have released oil and other toxic chemicals into the water. Further research will be needed to determine the true impact of the conflict on the ecology of the Black Sea caused by oil leaks and ammunition, but these impacts have the potential to be significant. In the near future, the Russian aggression against Ukraine has created a variety of risks for the safety of navigation, and the most problematic is the risk for commercial vessels of hitting a drifting naval mine. As of today, more than 70 mines were found drifting in the Black Sea, and most of them has been destroyed. Another navigation danger are the Russian surface-to-air missile boosters that washed on Romanian littoral. These were not isolated cases of Russian ammunition found on Romanian land and waters, with multiple boosters and mines found throughout the war. The Romanian Navy is currently involved in mine search operations in our area of responsibility. However, eliminating the mine threat in the Black Sea will take a long time, will require significant resources, and will properly begin only after the aggression against Ukraine will be over. This is due to the fact that mine countermeasure operations are relatively slow, and because ships that are involved in these operations require the absence of a military threat. Since the beginning of the offensive against Ukraine, cases of GPS jamming in the Black Sea were reported more frequently. This issue was also confirmed by the European Union Aviation Safety Agency and by NATO Shipping Center. These organizations stress that the GPS jamming in the Black Sea has intensified in recent months, and that the threat of collateral damages or direct hits on civilian shippings in the northwest Black Sea area remained extremely high. GPS jamming was also confirmed by the Romanian Coast Guard. GPS disturbances have the potential to create problems for the safety of navigation in the Black Sea, as commercial ships and aircraft rely on GPS for navigation. The main issue for shipping is that vessels to navigate in crowded area during the night time or during bad weather are more vulnerable to potential collisions. For the Romanian Navy, the most important things are to monitor all data and sources of and channels, to establish recommended route for commercial use, and to patrol of recommended routes by military assets. To Romanian Navy is a small one, but we are paying a lot of attention to keep the freedom of navigation of all the ships entering in our economic exclusive zone. And for that issue, for that reason, we have paid a lot of attention. Through Romanian Maritime Hydrographic Directorate, each day, whenever is possible, and whenever we consider that is mandatory to inform all the ships, we are providing notice to air and mariners every day, each second, in order to inform each captain about a possible danger, about a drifting mine, about the GPS jamming. Romanian Navy also is paying a lot of attention, having in the air maritime patrol aircraft, having drones and UAVs in order to have a very strong surveillance above the drifting, above all the danger in the on the surface of the Black Sea. And we are having each day a ship patrolling on the recommended routes we have already established. Up to now, about 950 ships entered in our economic exclusive zone. And we are monitoring all of them, and we are putting to all the captains and the ship drivers all the recommended routes that we are trying to keep them very safe in order to show that Romanian Navy is very much is taking in consideration very much this freedom of navigation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Admiral. Your presentation underscores one of the themes that I was mentioning early on, which is maritime governance. There are many dimensions to maritime governance. There's the management of all of these ships that are transiting your waters. There is the danger of mines. There is the danger of other threats that can be aboard these ships. And I think that becoming good at maritime governance requires specific investments, and particularly for Romania, the scale of all of the maritime traffic that transits your waters demands very good maritime governance, the ability to inspect, the ability to impose safety, to protect essential infrastructure like GPS and navigational aids is very big, and just the sheer number of merchant vessels creates a huge management problem. So I think maritime governance is very important. I'd like to open the discussion now to the audience to ask questions, and if you would just direct your questions to either Admiral Jaworski, Admiral PEDRE, or Admiral COMAN. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. I'm Ion Ionita. I'm a journalist, editor-in-chief of Romanian magazine History. And my question is, all of you, admirals, you emphasized how critical importance has Romanian Navy traffic, Sulina Channel and Constanța Harbor. You mentioned, Admiral, 30 million tons of Ukrainian cereals transited through these waters, and it was critical importance for the global food security. My question is for all of us, what can the NATO members do to increase Romanian Navy capabilities to defend these crucial waters and to increase the capability to maintain free traffic in the Black Sea coast and sea, taking into account Montreux Convention? Thank you.
I'll be the first one. Mr. Ionita, I will start with the end of your question, saying that Montreux Convention proved to be one very strong and reliable instrument to keep a fair and correct balance in the Black Sea. What did the alliance for us? Alliance, Turkey, United States, France, Italy gave us maritime patrol aircrafts almost every day surveilling the surface of the ship. we are having a strong connectivity as well with the Sixth Fleet and all the other NATO allies, exchanging information about any kind of threats could appear or might appear in the Black Sea. On the other hand, we are having a very strong relation with the Minister of Interior and all the other national institutions in order to assure freedom of navigation, as I emphasized. So Romanian Navy is strongly supported by the allied countries in order to have a very clear air and surface maritime picture. Although exists this Montreux Convention, but as I said, Montreux Convention is a factor of stability and put a stage, put all the littoral in a situation of confident, I'm sorry, in a confident stage. Thank you.
Let me add a few remarks, because it's not only direct help assistance to Romanian Navy or some specific country. I think that not also NATO, but also EU, we have to cooperate together, because it's our common effort to provide safety of our merchant fleet. Goods now that are coming from different parts of the world, so the sea lines of communication are pretty long distance, and we have to cooperate, and in that time we can achieve our success and have safe transit our goods to our countries.
Yeah, if I may, just 2 comments. The first is, I think no matter the outcome of this tragic war, the reality is maritime security will continue to be a challenge within the Black Sea region, and realistically the Kremlin's strategic view of the region is unlikely to change, and therefore for NATO, countering Russian influence in the Black Sea is central to ensuring the peace and stability of Europe's southeastern flank, but also ensuring the unfettered flow of trade, in many cases to quite vulnerable markets. So specifically to the question that you pose, I think there are a number of areas where NATO partner nations, and I know are already making progress in these areas, but a couple of key areas where we can all help. One is in terms of maritime domain awareness, integrating that picture more effectively. That will be useful both in countering Russian malign activity, but also ensuring and upholding the rules-based international order. I think a second area that's already been touched upon is mine countermeasures. As you know, the United Kingdom and the Royal Navy maintains very substantial capability in this area. And for example, we've already gifted 2 Sandown-class mine countermeasures vessels to the Ukrainian Navy. And then finally, I think the other area, and I talked about it in my presentation, I think the war, one of the key lessons is the ability for even a nation with a very small navy to be able to impact upon the freedom and maneuver of a more capable navy in terms of combat capability, such as the Russian fleet. I think there's more we can do in terms of strengthening anti-access and area denial capabilities for Black Sea nations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one brief question.
Hello, hi. It's going to be brief because a part of it has been already answered. The question was regarding the remaining capability of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, because they have lost the Moscow, some landing ships, and everything. And how do you see that in the context of an almost imminent counterattack by the Ukrainians? So what would be the role of the Navy, in your view, in a counteroffensive, Ukrainian counteroffensive? Thank you.
Anyone want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a go. I mean, I think you've hit on a really strategic point and an important one, hence, and I wasn't having a go at those people here from the media, but the entire narrative of the war has very much been dominated by the land-centric aspects of the war, the grinding war of attrition in the East, when in fact there's a very substantial maritime aspect, which hopefully I articulated, not least the underpinning strategic reasons why Russia and Mr. Putin have ventured south and wished to preclude access to the Ukrainian littoral for Ukraine, therefore basically isolating the country's economic viability. I think Montreux has been useful in that it's of course precluded the Russian Navy from being able to backfill the Black Sea Fleet following the strike in April last year on the Moskva. I think it's fair to say with assistance from the West, the Ukrainians are increasingly aware of the fundamental role that maritime power has in terms of inflicting dilemmas upon the Russian Federation and hence the growth of its A2AD capabilities and as I alluded to, repeat attacks on Sevastopol and the Crimean region. And I think we'll only see that develop. So I'm pretty confident, and clearly I don't have access to the Ukrainian plans, but I would imagine the counter-offensive will certainly factor in very substantial maritime aspects to it. So watch this space would be my answer.
Thank you. Just my personal opinion. At the beginning, Russian fleet proved to be an active one, and we're trying to create some turmoil in the northwestern part. But from that time up to now, it was proved that they used the fleet and the submarine just to launch their missiles and just to have a very slow presence western to Crimea. So after the fall of the Snake Island especially, they were more inexistent that having a very strong presence, except the fact they launched their caliber missiles.
Thank you very much, Admiral, and thank you, audience, for your attention. And I'd like to thank our distinguished panel for their presentations.